Oh my god, I literally just noticed a gigantic mistake. Whoops. On this channel, I talk a lot about other people's animations, but what if I dissected one of my own animated shots? What's gonna be really fun about this one is I actually have the project file here on my laptop that we're gonna open up and take a look at so that you can see some of the techniques that I'm using to get appealing animations. Am I actually gonna reveal that I have no idea what I'm doing and I'm a total hack when it comes to animation? Oh my god, that's so embarrassing. Stick around and find out. So first, let's take a look at the final animation that we're gonna be looking at today. So if you've watched any of my videos before, you might have noticed some characters that keep getting swapped out in different videos. Specifically, these characters here. If you're unaware, LEGO created a line in the early 2000s called Bionicle. I've been creating my own Bionicle animations that I've been sharing on Twitter and Instagram, and I gotta say, it's some of the best work that I've ever done as an animator. This shot in particular that we're gonna be looking at today is probably the most challenging shot that I've ever had to do. This particular shot was made for a Bionicle art book trailer, and I had the honor of animating the hero shot of the trailer. Definitely go check out the rest of the trailer and the art book. I'll put the link in the description for that, but there was so much love and respect put into this art book that y'all need to check it out. At the end of this video, you're gonna see the final shot with professional lighting, as well as sound design from one of the actual sound designers from across the Spider-Verse. You might be wondering how long this shot actually took me to complete. Was it 2 days? Was it 2 weeks? It was actually closer to 2 months on just this one shot, because not only did I have to animate this character to look like this badass superhero, I had to do it 5 more times. If you couldn't tell, creating animations like this one takes up a lot of time, and sometimes it cuts into my personal time. I have to constantly remind myself to balance everything, eating healthy, getting enough sleep, and regular exercise. But let's be real, sticking to these habits isn't always easy. That's where today's sponsor comes in. Trainwell is a unique fitness app that connects you with a real human coach, not an AI. You start by talking with your coach about your goals, schedule, and any needs you might have, like managing injuries, and they create the perfect tailored workout plan. For me, accountability is the biggest factor for staying on track, and knowing that an actual human coach is helping to guide and check in with me keeps me motivated. What I love is that the program adapts to where you are, whether it's at home, the gym, or even while traveling. They can also tailor your exercise to what you have on hand, so there's no need to go out and buy hundreds of dollars worth of workout equipment. You don't have to overthink your routine because your coach handles it all. And if you're an Apple Watch user like me, they even use built-in sensors to provide real-time feedback on things like posture and form. It's actually really cool. You can start improving your fitness journey with a 14-day free trial by using my link below. Having a professional trainer who understands your unique needs can be a game changer. Regular exercise not only boosts my energy, but also strengthens my creativity and resilience as an animator. So check out Trainwell with the link in the description and the pinned comment and kick your fitness journey into overdrive. Maybe one day you'll be as strong as the characters in this animation. Speaking of which, let's dive in. Okay, so we're inside Blender, my animation software of choice, and we're looking at the scene file that I used to animate this shot. I started looking at references from other movies that have a lot of heroes in them. I don't know if you can think of any other movies that had multiple superheroes in them in the last, 15 years, but I found this shot from the first Avengers movie where Hawkeye is in the center and all the heroes are surrounding him. I basically reversed engineered this shot for everybody to be in their final pose first, more or less, and then worked backwards from there to try to get them into that pose. So I'll explain what I mean here. So in thinking of composition for group shots like this, one of the best techniques I found was to make triangle shapes with the arrangement of the heads. I started to arrange the heads in here so that we have one here, one back here, and then here. So I created this triangle shape here between this first group. For here, this one's a little more apparent, but you can see 1, 2, 3 with these heads. So creating this triangle shape again. And then even for the ones in here, you still have this triangular shape between the 3 of them. I also use the distance from the camera to sort of stagger these elements and these characters. In the foreground, you have Vakama right here. And then in the next level, you have Whenua, Matau. And then the third level back would be Nuju and Nokama. And then the furthest back is Anoah. So I created this sort of staggered effect, and it seems to have really helped this composition. Also, things to note in general are lines of action. The lines of his wing actually, if you notice, they point directly to the top of Nuju's head here. But also, the way that this wing comes up and then goes down this way is pointing right to Nokama's head. I do try to think of this when I'm framing the compositions of these sort of hero shots, and I try not to have any tangents. In animation, tangents are when two lines overlap each other and look like they're going across the same line. This is something from 2D that animators try to avoid if they can. I try to have elements overlapping each other that they're not exactly lined up with each other. For example, the tool on Whenua here, the way that it slopes in, I wanted to have it separate from the shoulder right here. And even the way that the shovel tool is down here, it breaks the silhouette of the leg here so that it sticks out. Another small example, I probably could have lowered this tool a little bit more so that it was closer to here, so that it sort of bumps up against this mask part. But also for Nokama's tool on the right here, the way that it breaks the silhouette of the body here. I tried my best to combine all of these elements so that it's not just one gigantic metallic mess here. So now that we've looked at the end frame, let's try to work backwards and go character by character to see the choices that I've made in this scene. By far, the most difficult character to animate was Nokama on the right, and I'll get to her last, but I want to start going from left to right for these characters. So we're going to start off with the rolling character, Whenua. Now, this might look like a really complicated thing that I'm doing with Whenua here, but actually what's going on is I realized that it would be a lot easier just to animate a standard rolling primitive ball. So I did exactly that. So I created this ball that's around the character, and what I ended up doing was actually animating the ball and then parenting Whenua to the ball. So I just animated this ball the way that I wanted him to roll into frame. So I took a look at the original ad that was made for him in 2004. He actually bounces and doesn't actually roll across the ground. He's sort of bouncing as he rolls. So with that in mind, this was just a simple bouncing ball exercise. So the next step was to pose out Whenua so that he matched sort of the general scale of this ball. And as you can see, his tools are sort of rounded at the end. So you get this sort of natural semi-roundish shape to the character. So the next step was to find the bone that moves the entire character, which happens to be this bone on the hips. So I can drag this around and the entire character will move. From there, it's just as simple as going over to the bone constraints and adding a child of constraint to the rolling ball that we animated. And now if we scrub through, you can see that the character is parented to the ball. So the thing that was going to sell this shot was to be able to come out of the parented action into a natural follow through of this movement. The ball stops moving on frame 88 here. And then from there, it's just animating the hips to follow through that movement and push him out and over the shape of the ball. In order to sell this character stopping himself with his tools, I had to utilize a technique called IK and FK switching. When you're animating arms and legs, there are two ways you can approach them, FK and IK. FK stands for forward kinematics. Essentially, this moves the character like a puppet, and in exactly the way that you would expect, where if you rotate the shoulder, the rest of the arm moves with the character. And if you rotate the elbow, the hand moves with it, but the shoulder stays where it was. Generally speaking, I usually try to animate the arms in FK as much as possible. But let's say the character does something like put their hand up against the wall. It would be a pain to do this in FK since you'd have to manually rotate the hand, the arm, and the shoulder to try to match the general position of this arm. So this is where IK comes in, inverse kinematics. The nice thing about IK is that you can position the hand where you want it to stay in global space, and the rest of the arm will conform to match the distance between the shoulder and the hand. In practice, it looks something like this, where the hand can be moved and the arm is actually going to change its orientation and the distance between the shoulder and the elbow to match where the hand is in its global position. It allowed me to do this movement where the character overshoots slightly and the rest of his body leans over his hands. So when you look at this through the camera, it looks like he is rolling, planting his feet, planting his hands, and then momentum is carrying his body over the rest of his hands. And then in a similar way, I have to switch very subtly between the IK hands here, and then when he starts to move the tools, now it's back into FK. Yeah, and then for his shake, I just tried to offset some of the parts so that it seems like he's, moving everything independently, like he's just giving a general body shake. So I had this movement start with the head, which actually leads the rest of the body to follow through. And with the principle of offset, we can have these two different elements of the head and the hands separate. So you have this sort of discombobulated movement of him just shaking himself off after that big roll in. And then at the end, he takes a second just to find the camera, and there's his end pose. So the thing I needed to be careful with when he rolls in is that he actually doesn't connect with the other character next to him, Anoah. I had to time his roll in just right so he doesn't clip through the other character that he rolls past. As you can see with this movement, he's swinging his tool around, and then I actually had to just, move that tool just slightly out of the way so that he can roll by him untouched. Speaking of which, let's move on to the second character, Anoah. So I wanted to give each character kind of their own moment. His was the first big movement that you see with his tool spinning around. So this character's personality is pretty cocky and arrogant, but not in a showboaty way, more in a confident way. So instead of having this big dynamic roll in action, I wanted to keep him pretty simple and just have his tool swinging around like he's about to kick ass. So the rest of his animation is pretty straightforward. He just walks into his position, although I actually have him look this way at Whenua rolling in here past him. I just move his head so that he's kind of following it with his eyes. But aside from that, it's pretty straightforward. He just walks into his final position and just sticks his tool over his shoulder. But the reason I was particularly proud of this walking in and settling is because I used a technique that I've actually never used before. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to show you the difference between what I did with this character and the next character. So both actions are pretty much the same. They just walk into their final position and strike their last pose. But I actually approached these characters two different ways, so I'll show you what I mean. So the way that I did Anoah's walk cycle was that I actually animated this walk cycle in its global position first, without actually moving the character. So the feet would be sliding along, and the character would just not be moving forward, but the feet would be sliding along. Then I actually animated the root bone so that it would move along the floor and drive the character moving forward. As you can see, this bone highlighted here actually comes to a stop, and that's where the character stops. Now, the biggest factor with this is that the feet will probably be sliding on the ground when you do it this way. So what I ended up doing was putting these locators here on the ground, and then putting a copy location constraint on the actual foot bone, and then just keyframing the influence on and off. What that does is it actually prevents the foot from moving at all because the locator itself is not moving. So if the foot is copying the location of this locator, the foot itself will not be sliding on the ground. And then you have the foot firmly planted until you unparent it and you can move it again. So that's one way you can animate the character walking into position. But let's look at the next character to see the other way that I approach this. Let's take a look at Nuju. For Nuju, I took more of a straightforward approach for his walking. The root bone of Nuju actually doesn't move at all. What I do instead is actually just animate the hips moving forward and then have the feet locked into position when they land on the ground. So Nuju's is more straightforward, where the hips are actually the thing that's driving the animation forward as he moves. And then I'm just animating the feet to plant themselves on the ground while the hip continues to move forward, and the feet, because they're in IK, they're not going to move forward at all. So the main difference between these two is that the first character is animated to walk first and then applied to the world, whereas the second character is animated in more of a straight ahead workflow. Personally, I like the approach that I use for Anoah better than I do for Nuju. If I compare the two next to each other, Nuju does feel a little bit more floaty than Anoah. Anoah feels like his weight is actually moving and shifting through the world. But honestly, I didn't mind that too much because of how Nuju is characterized. This character comes from a world of ice, so he's a little more cold and rigid. Not to mention the fact that his mask has this gigantic telescopic lens on it. So my thought was, for this character, he's walking through the world while zoomed in really far on something, so he doesn't want to really shift his weight up and down too much. He wants to have more of a stable head. So because of this approach, I had the thought, well, he would probably be surprised if he was all the way zoomed in and then he just saw someone appear next to him. So what I actually have him do is react in surprise to Whenua showing up, as if he was zoomed in really far and just didn't see or hear him coming. And then when Whenua lands, I have him sort of react in surprise to this character landing. And that's sort of his moment. In other adaptations of this character that I've seen, he's a little more neurotic than some of the other Toa here. So it made sense for him to be a little bit caught off guard when he sees Whenua land. Okay, moving along, let's look at our primary color characters, starting with Vakama. This little guy right here. For the sake of continuity, this character starts in the previous shot with his disc launcher at his side, and that's all we see. So I needed to start this character in a pose where his disc launcher is at his side like it is here. And this is a big reveal, so the character should be standing heroically like he's going to save the character that's in danger. So my main objective for this shot was to create the sense that the disc launcher tool is really heavy. So with that in mind, that drove the rest of the animation for this character. Oh my god, I literally just noticed a gigantic mistake. Whoops. Okay, class, see if you can spot what's wrong with this. Did you catch it? Did you notice that the disc launcher goes right through the leg? Oh my gosh, it's so It's so obvious. Okay, that's gonna bug me. I have to fix this. So literally I think we just move it there and then it should be good. Yeah, no, that fixed it. Oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing. Okay, anyway, so if this tool is really heavy, this character is going to have to use a lot more of his body than just his arm to lift this tool up. So to anticipate him lifting up the disc launcher, I actually have his weight shift to his back leg first. And it seems like it's kind of a big jump here, but when you see it through the perspective of the camera, it's actually not too bad of a movement back. It was more important to actually shift the weight to the left first, since his movement is going to be to the right, to kind of anticipate that. So to practice this, I actually just lifted my guitar in the same way. What I realized is that I would bend my arm first and then use the rest of the abs and the shoulders to lift up the tool. So I tried to mimic that here as best I could and actually have the arm bend up first, and then the shoulder and the abs lift up the launcher. And what goes up must come down. So when the tool actually comes down at the end here, I wanted the animation of it to feel really fast, as if it's really heavy. So I have it slam down here, and then he has this follow through where it continues to lower. And then when the character takes aim at the end here, I have his mask tilt down slightly as if his eyes are sort of squinting to try to concentrate. So another composition thing that I did with this character is because his head is tilted this way a little bit, I actually wanted the disc launcher to tilt the other way. So you have this discrepancy between the way that his head is tilted and the way that the launcher is. It would be a lot more boring if, let's say, the launcher was tilted this way and then the head was tilted just straight. You know, it's an interesting pose, but we can make it a little more dynamic by just offsetting both the launcher and the head so that they're rotated just a little bit differently from each other. Okay, now that we've aired my dirty laundry for everybody to see, let's move on to the next character. Matau. So Matau was actually one of the easier characters to animate because I really didn't have to do that much work for the first half of his animation. I knew I wanted to have him start way in the far background, fly, zoom up past camera, and then land on the ground. So if you've used Blender before, you might see the trick that I'm using here. I'm actually just animating him along this curve here. So what I did was I created two objects. I created the curve itself, which is the flight path that I wanted him to go on. And then I created another locator, which has on it a follow path constraint. Using the target as the curve itself, I was able to animate the offset of this locator so that it moves along the curve. And then similar to what we did with Whenua, I'm actually just parenting the root bone of Matau to that flight path locator. Then what I'm able to do is actually rotate Matau as he flies along this path, and I can change how much of his wings I want to see at any given point. So I knew when he zoomed up, I wanted you to just catch the fact that his wings were going down. So it's super subtle, but as you can see, when he starts to go off camera, his wings actually go into their rest position. So let's look at the landing here. So a big part of him falling into his position here is just animating this root bone to start up off camera and then jump back into its rest position. I wanted his landing to feel pretty strong here, so I actually had the legs stretch out really far, as you can see right here. This is really stretching the leg here, but again, once it's in motion, you're not really going to be able to see it. But I have his legs stretch into the pose that they're going to be landing on, and then when his body follows through, the legs, because they're in IK, will just stay exactly where they are. And I can have the body settle for that movement. I added a little secondary action on the wings when they land. You can actually see it better if I go to this angle here. I don't think anyone's going to notice that, but I was proud of it. And then when he stands up, I have the wings pop into their position. Initially, I didn't have him do that, but it just felt natural for the character. This character's personality is a lot more showboaty than Anoah, so him having the wings up there, again, is just like another way of showboating. Okay, before my camera runs out of battery, we're going to take a look at the last character, Nokama. So this character by far was the toughest character to animate. You might be asking yourself why I didn't just have her walk forward, and I'm asking myself that same question too. But again, it all goes back to character here. The character of Nokama is incredibly hardworking, and she's gonna do her best to hustle into the situation. So rather than her walking in, I have her start to run in. All right, this one's for all you anime fans. I actually animated her running with this Naruto style run. It actually made sense because she needs to swing her tools back before she throws them forward. So it actually kind of was necessary. You can kind of see the feet sliding a little bit on this one, but again, if we move to the camera, it's so far back and she's actually running towards camera, so you're really not going to see the feet sliding forward towards camera too much. And again, she's coming from out of focus and the darkness into more of a brightly lit area. So it's a cheat. I cheated. So the movement itself, I needed her to get into a lower position and then fling her tools up to propel herself forward. And then she goes into this movement. Now, I probably should have looked at a reference for this, but I just wanted to try it myself and see if I could freehand it. Also, I don't even know what this movement would be called. So for this acrobatic move that Nokama does here, I wanted to have her tools plant themselves on these little poles. So the way that I approached this was I wanted to have a locator in the spot roughly that the tool would latch onto the pillar and kind of position it in a place where the tool could rotate around it. Now, it's not perfect. Again, this is going to be something that's really in the background and sort of out of focus. So I'm not putting too much emphasis on this. I actually put a track 2 constraint on the hand and have the target set to the locator that's right here. So now if I move this locator, you can see that the hand is actually changing its rotation to follow wherever the locator is. So with this in mind, I can put the locator in the front of this pillar here and then just keyframe on and off the influence that the constraint has over the hand. Now for her landing, because her feet are leading the action, I wanted the feet to land first before the tools come through and swipe into this sort of landing ninja pose, as you can see here. What I ended up doing was making sure that the tools had a nice smooth arc. So I had the tool follow this sort of general curve into where the landing position was. And then because we don't have any time to waste in this shot, I have her look up, see the camera, and step back into this pose here, as if she's ready to strike. There's some subtleties in the feet that I want to point out here because I spent a lot of time on them, and this is my video. So after she lands, I wanted her to reposition herself into her final rest pose. So first what I did was I moved the left foot back into its final pose and then had the right foot slide back into its position. And I just have it pivot where the toes would be so that it's like she's putting her weight on her back foot and allowing her toes to push her body back into that final pose. And then after the left foot lands on the ground here, I have the right foot actually slide into its final pose. The thing that was really important for this scene is I wanted to make sure that all of the individual actions that the characters are doing and performing aren't all overlapping each other at the same time. Even when I'm animating different characters, I usually will turn on 1 or 2 other characters just to see how their movements are lining up with everybody else's. For example, I wanted to offset Whenua landing on the left side of frame and Nokama landing on the right side of frame so that they weren't happening at the exact same time. Whenua lands, Vakama's disc launcher lowers, and then Nokama lands in her final position. But these are all offset from each other. And then obviously Matau lands after that. Now it's not perfect. There is a little bit of twinning here. Twinning is when 2 or more objects are moving at the same time in the same type of way. So you can see all 4 characters in the foreground here, Whenua, Vakama, Matau, and Nokama, all kind of move up at the same time here, if I kind of scrub back and forth here. So ideally, I would go in and offset one of these movements. Maybe Vakama's disc launcher can raise just slightly after everybody else's. But again, these are really subtle things, and this would be something that you would address in the polish stage. So now that the final animation is done, I can send this off to be lit, rendered, and sound designed. And here is the final animated piece.
Who else could possibly be working?
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this breakdown, I actually break down other animated films like Across the Spider-Verse, which you can watch right here. Until next time, thank you for watching.